Hi, everyone. So we are on our last body system, the nervous system. So once again, I've provided this PowerPoint for you if you would like to just print that out and follow along with me. I also provided notes for you to fill in along the way, whatever you are comfortable with. If you do not have access to a printer, no problem. Just write everything down in your notebook. Okay, so here we go, the nervous system. So the nervous system is going to be divided into two main parts. You're going to have the central nervous system and you're going to have the peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system is going to be your brain. And when you think of the central nervous system, think of the center of your body. So we're going to be talking about the brain and we're going to be talking about the spinal cord, the things that run in the center. So the brain is the main control center of the body. It's going to receive and interpret information. So the brain gets information all the time. I'm sitting here looking at my computer screen. I'm reading stuff off that those words are being, my um, my optical nerve is pulling in all that information and my brain is processing it and I'm understanding it and I'm able to speak with you about what's going on, on this PowerPoint. So the brain really does a lot more than you could even imagine. It's going to solve problems. So, you see I'm home with my daughters all the time right now. So if I see a toy in the middle of where I'm walking, I'm going to recognize it, and my brain is going to say, "Oh, you're going to want to go around that toy, otherwise you're going to get hurt." So it's constantly solving problems, controlling emotions. Some of us better than others. We also have the spinal cord, like I said, part of the central nervous system that is going to be bundles of nerve fibers. And this is where your brain is going to tell your body to move. So, believe it or not, the movement of your muscles are going to be directed by your spinal cord, which we're going to talk about. Um, Actually, we'll talk about right now. So, we've heard of people becoming paralyzed. So, let's say they had an injury, and if I'm just gonna, one second, I'm just gonna, so let's say they had an injury where they were paralyzed and couldn't walk anymore. Well, that means that they had an injury somewhere around here, and actually their spinal cord was severed or cut, whether it be from a bone, like a bone breaking and cutting it, or breaking from some sort of an impact, whatever it is. So what happens is it gets cut, let's say right here. Okay, so I want you to think of our brain and our spinal cord like like a highway it's constantly running up and down to communicate with each other. So what happens is when this gets broken, the spinal cord, the message has nowhere to go. So what normally would cause you to walk, these nerves right here, the message is not even getting down to. So in that case, that's the reason why people are not able to walk and when they're paralyzed and they've been injured here. Now, if you've been injured in the neck region, you can possibly become what's known as a quadriplegic, which means that don't have the ability to move your arms or your legs. Well, let's think about it this way. Once again, here's your brain. If that message broke down somewhere over here, well, you're not even getting to those nerve bundles that control the muscles in your arms and your back and your legs. So it does make sense when you think about it in terms of like a highway of information. And when that highway is broken, there is no way that information can jump over the highway. So if you think about it, if a highway has a huge hole in it, there's no way that car is going to be able to jump over it to get to the other side. So kind of like that, there's no way that the information can get to where it had broken off. So pretty interesting. And the nerves are the only cell of the body that cannot regenerate, meaning they cannot make more of themselves. So once you break or damage a nerve cell, you are unable to get that back. Okay. So research right now is trying to use stem cells to actually try and regrow nerve cells. They've been somewhat successful, but right now it's still in the preliminary trial stages. But currently, there is no way to regenerate nerve cells, which is the reason why once it's broke, you basically can't fix it. Okay, so let's go back to this. Okay. Sorry, guys. Let me just run through this. Okay. So now we're going to look at, that was the central nervous system, your brain and your spinal cord. Now we're going to look at the peripheral nervous system, which is like everything else. So think of how your arms move and how your legs move, okay? So we've got 31 pairs of nerve endings that branch out from the vertebrae on the left side and on the right side. And as you can see, these are all connected to our back and our arms. So everything that we're going to talk about in a couple minutes, the motor and sensory neurons, are controlled through your peripheral nervous system. And then obviously your nerves. We have billions of them in our body, and they branch out. Anything that our body, any information our body takes in and receives and reacts to has a nerve ending, has a nerve cell there. So pretty interesting there. If you want to try this at home right now, just roll up your sleeve, and if you go like this, you'll feel twice. You'll feel 2 touches, and then as you slowly work yourself in, you feel 2 touches, and then you keep going in. So if you can see, I'm going closer and closer, and then if you're right on top of one another, you only feel 1 touch, and that's because you're only touching 1 nerve cell. Pretty interesting. Okay, so this is a little complicated to draw, so take your time, and like I've said in the past, if you need to, go ahead and pause or rewind, whatever you need to do. Okay, so here is a nerve cell. Looks very interesting, looks very different than your typical cells that we've studied. So here is your nerve cell. Here is the cell body of the nerve cell. So you'll see here's the cell body, and this red thing inside is the nucleus. So just like any other cell, it's got a nucleus. And it has these branches on the outside, and these branches are called dendrites. And dendrites actually they're these web-like things that come out of the cell body that help pick up on that information. So when we talk about our 5 senses are always trying to pick up on information that our brain can process and use to have our body react to. So these dendrites are all around the cell body. So now when these dendrites actually pick up on something, the message actually goes into the cell body, and then it's going to go down what's known as the axon. Now, before we continue, I want you to understand that the initial message that comes into the nerve cell is electrical. Okay, so that electrical message goes down the cell body, down what's known as the axon, and then we get to the end of the nerve cell. And what happens is that electrical message becomes a chemical message. So once it's a chemical message, that chemical message comes off of these endings, and it triggers the next nerve cell to work. So think of the nerve cells like dominoes. Okay, so when you set up dominoes, they're right next to each other, and then when you hit one domino, it affects the next, it affects the next. That's how nerve cells work. So what this is showing is this nerve cell here is picking up on the electrical message. It's going into the cell body and down the axon, where it's still an electrical message, and then it's going to change into a chemical message. Now, a synapse right here, that's the space between 2 neurons. So you may want to write that down for yourself. The synapse is the space between 2 neurons. So those chemical messages then hit the next nerve cell, which turns it into an electrical message, and then down all the way down till it hits the end of the nerve cell, which then turns it into a chemical message to then trigger the next nerve cell, so on and so forth. So it's pretty interesting how this happens, the changing between the electrical message and the chemical message. Okay, so this is put on the notes. Okay, so each neuron is going to receive and send electrical and chemical messages. So this is just reiterating what I said. So your dendrites are going to pick up on the electrical message. It's going to send it to the cell body, which then goes down the axon. And then once it gets down the axon, it's going to then change it into from an electrical message into a chemical message. And that little gap between the neurons is called a synapse. So that the synapse is where we find the chemical messages. When you're talking about actually running down the neuron, that is the electrical message. Okay, so we've got two types of neurons in the body. We've got sensory neurons that pick up a signal and send the message to the spinal cord. Okay, remember that spinal cord is going to be then sending out all the information to the motor neuron. Okay, so sensory neuron, brain, spinal cord, then motor neuron is going to actually take the spinal cord, the information from the spinal cord, it's going to make its way out to the muscle, and it's going to tell the muscle to react a certain way. So we'll get into that. Okay, so two types of responses. You have your involuntary response, which is your reflexes. So for example, when you touch something hot, your body automatically pulls back, right? That's an involuntary response. Believe it or not, those get sent to the spinal cord, and the spinal cord is what makes the decision of what to do. Okay, so if you take a look, we've got, so in this case, if you've gone to the doctor and they hit your knee, right? So when they hit your knee, it actually is the stimulus. And what happens is it picks up on that feeling. It's going to take that message to the spinal cord. The spinal cord's going to process it. And then when it processes it, it's going to then tell your muscle to contract. And then what happens? It causes your knee to move. So that's what happens. So the stimulus was picked up the impulse. It traveled into the spinal cord. The spinal cord processed it, and then said, okay, muscle cell, you're going to contract. And then when you contract, that's what's going to cause the knee to move. Think about how quickly that happens. Pretty amazing. Okay, so once again, here is so touching the hot stove, then it goes in, then the spinal cord is here, it makes a decision, and then it tells the hand, pull back. Okay, those are involuntary responses. Your voluntary responses is when you are going to control the action. So for example, you hear a phone ring. Okay, so what do? You hear it, your brain says, okay, phone rang, I'm going to get up and I'm going to walk towards it, I'm going to pick up the phone. Okay, so that gets sent to the brain that has to process it. Involuntary, since we have to make that move super quickly, the spinal cord is going to make a decision and it's going to react for us. So whenever you're actually causing a change or causing a reaction, that's called a stimulus. And a response is how your body reacts to the stimulus. So I've just got a couple of ones I want to go over with you. Okay. So the stimulus, you see a fly. So what happens? You have an optic nerve that tracks the fly and you see the fly, right? So you're getting that information and it's going to your brain and it's going to say, oh, here comes the fly. And so in order for me to get rid of the fly, I'm going to lift up my arm and I'm going to swat it out of the way so it's not in my face anymore. So that was a voluntary response. You saw it, your brain processed it. It said, okay, I'm going to get this fly out of my way. Let's pick up the hand and swat it out of the way. Okay, so there's one example. Then you've got the phone ringing, like I said before. So believe it or not, you have an auditory nerve. Okay, so all of your five senses basically all have these major nerve endings. So you've got your auditory nerve that hears, oh, the phone rang. So what do? It sends a message to the brain. The brain says, okay, phone's ringing. Let's start moving our arm muscles. Let's moving our leg muscles. Let's get towards the phone so that we could pick up the phone. Once again, a voluntary response. Okay, another example, you see a red light. Okay, so your optic nerve sees the red light, sends a message to the brain that says, oh, red light, guess what I got to do? I'm going to have to pick up my leg and I'm going to have to press on the brake, right? When I press on the brake, that will eventually cause me to stop the car. So I had the message that my eye got, that it was red. It went to my brain processed it. My brain sent a message to my leg muscle. Gastrocnemius, remember, is your calf muscle, to lift up your leg and to press down on the brake to stop the car. Okay. So hopefully this helps with just learning a little bit about the nervous system, just the general breakdown of the two parts, the peripheral and the central nervous system. Just really try and understand how that nerve cell works, the difference between the electrical impulse versus the the electrical signal versus the chemical signal. And just to know the difference between a voluntary and an involuntary response. So the involuntary response is when it has to be super quick and the spinal cord is going to make that decision, while the voluntary response is the brain's decision. That doesn't have to happen so quickly. So it can, there can be a little bit more of a thought there. Okay, so if you have any questions, any videos that I post to try and help you guys understand this, please, please, please watch. They're only there to help you understand the material, and we can go over any questions you may have in our Zoom session this week. So I wish you all a great night, and we will see each other soon. Bye now.